So a little bit about who I am and what my perspective is, because I straddle two unique worlds. I'm an ER doctor, as Dr. Durfee was saying. But by background, actually, I was an EMT on an ambulance for 3 years. I was a volunteer firefighter for 3 more years. That was during my medical school time, and I went through medical school and training. And by the way, I'm a diehard Bruin, so I did my training at UCLA. SC people out there, boo. Okay, so I spent the first 11 years of first 10 years of my clinical work in the ER at St. Francis Medical Center in South LA, which is a private hospital, a nonprofit. Spent the last 4 years there as their department chairman and medical director. A year ago, I made the transition back into the EMS world, which is sort of my dream job, and I'm the medical director for the LA County Fire Department. So we talked about the healthcare delivery a little bit, but we kind of neglected to mention the EMS part of healthcare delivery. By the way, if I use any abbreviations you don't know, please just throw a hand up. I'm more than happy to spell it out. But so Los Angeles County Fire Department, we cover 2,300 square miles of territory, 4 million people. We cover all unincorporated parts of LA County and 58 contract cities. So we are the fire department for 58 of the smaller cities. We have about 3,000 paramedics and EMTs. We have about 600 lifeguards that cover all of the LA County beaches with the exception of Long Beach. We have 8 helicopters, we have boats, we have pretty much you name it. We cover mountains, ocean, islands, inner city, high rises, and everything in between. Last year we did about 303,000 medical calls, not counting the lifeguard medical calls. And the 300,000 medical calls we made up. So why would a doctor be in the fire department? 85% of the calls that the fire department goes on are medical calls. If you take out the false fire alarms, you take out the smell of gas, the cat in the tree, all the other things, it makes up 97.4% of the calls that the fire department goes on. We go on 38 medical calls for every fire we go on. Now granted, the sand fire, that counts as 1 call, but some of those calls are kind of big. St. Francis Medical Center, which is where I've worked for the last 11 years. I still work there part-time. I was there all weekend last weekend. I'll be there in graveyard shift on Friday night. It's inner city, about 80,000 annual visits. 25,000 of those are pediatric. We're a specialty hospital for trauma, stroke, heart attack. We're a receiving center for pediatrics. Pretty much, and the perinatal center with a neonatal intensive care unit. And we're also a paramedic base station. So I can give some perspective from both sides of the medical perspective, the pre-hospital and the ER hospital side. So let's do a scenario. So by the way, when you look at this cute little girl up there, she's totally fine, she's safe. That's my daughter, and she gives me attitude to this day. So she's not a victim. Well, she is a victim, but not in that sense of the word. So 2-year-old female reportedly fell while jumping on the bed. Left forearm shows some deformity. This is the x-ray that goes with that. Luckily, I picked the left-sided x-ray. That's not her arm, by the way. She's never broken a bone. Parents, when they present to the ER, appear appropriately concerned. This is one of the things that ER docs are taught to look for is, do the parents appear to be concerned for the level of injury that the child is displaying? The child's fracture is reduced and splinted, and is the fracture consistent with the mechanism of injury that they gave us? Yes, probably so. Maybe it's a high bed, maybe it's a really hard floor, maybe there's a toy in between. So there's no suspicion for abuse in this case because the story is consistent with the injury, it's age appropriate, and the parents seem appropriately concerned. So we make a follow-up plan with orthopedics, child gets discharged home. So let me break and ask a question. Why don't ER docs and EMS providers report more cases of abuse? In 2015, with 303,000 calls, we made 24 reports of child abuse. That is less than 1 case per 10,000. Do we think that that's an accurate number? No. So then the question is, why don't we report more? Are we not suspicious enough? Probably so. There are probably cases that we look at and question a little bit and then just kind of move on, and when we should be more suspicious. Sometimes the presenting parent isn't suspicious either, because sometimes the parent that presents with the child isn't the one who's the perpetrator. The process is really difficult. So as an ER director and basically an administrator for the last 5 years, I look a lot at processes. When people aren't following the process that you want them to follow, generally it's because there's something in the process, the way you've designed it, that makes it not the path of least resistance. You have to guide people down the process you want them to follow. If you make it too difficult, they just won't. They'll do workarounds, they'll avoid it at any cost. So what happens is when we have a process that's difficult, the threshold for us to report is higher. So I'm not going to report the cases I'm a little suspicious on because I really don't want to go through that process. I'm going to hold off for the cases that I'm really suspicious about, or I'm so suspicious that it's worth it to go through that horrible process for me to do it. So the end result is we have missed cases. So let's take that same child, the same child who was giving me difficulties this morning getting out the door. What if there had been a previous allegation of abuse on this patient or her sibling? She has an older brother, by the way, too. So what if I had known that the brother had had a case against them, or the brother had been removed from the home because of abuse in the past? I have no knowledge of that. If it exists in the system, which I'm sure it does, it's a system I don't have access to. If the parent doesn't tell me, then I won't know. And the parent may have a reason why they don't want to tell me. So unless we call DCFS or someone who has access to that system, we'll have no knowledge of it. ER and EMS providers don't have access to social services databases or law enforcement databases. So what if this was the third fracture for which this child had been seen in an ER in the prior 18 months, but there were different ERs? I can't see what County USC did a week ago, a month ago, a year ago. I can't see what the neighboring hospital a mile and a half down the street saw, unless I'm suspicious enough to call. But if I ask mom and say, hey mom, has this child been in the ER in the last year? And she says, no, I can't. There are about 80 different ERs around LA County. Who am I going to call? And there's no database to even tell me that the child has been seen somewhere. There's no centralized database. Hospitals don't share medical information without what I would describe as an onerous consent process. Oh, and by the way, that process, not even available 24 hours a day. Smaller hospitals, there's nobody in medical records after hours. So you can't get anything. The bigger hospitals, sometimes you can get them to fax stuff. It takes hours. During that time, my ER sees about 220 patients a day, and if you go on Google or you go on Yelp, look at the complaints, and pick St. Francis if you're interested because they're particularly boisterous. I looked at it last week, and the complaints are always, took too long, took too long, took too long, took too long. Well, I've got all those people beating on me to get seen, and at the same time, I have to go through this process to try to get records on one patient. So if abuse is ultimately confirmed, there's no feedback loop to inform prior providers that they'd missed it. So I'm going to share with you just a short story that happened to me. I was at the ICAN death review, which is an absolutely fabulous, heart-wrenching but fabulous committee. And they were presenting a case of a pediatric fatality from abuse. And it was mentioned that a month prior to the fatal abuse, that the child had been seen in my ER. So I know the web-based program. I went through the ER and thought, I just want to see who saw this patient so I can notify them. And then I look and see my own initials. And then I look at the case and go, I remember that kid. And I remember thinking about abuse, but I talked to mom, and mom wasn't suspicious. And sure enough, it was confirmed at that meeting that at that time, mom had some thoughts about it, but mom was in denial too. And so my only historian was the mom who was in denial. So there was no feedback loop that occurred once we confirmed that this child had been a fatal victim of abuse to let the prior providers know that they'd missed it, so that in the future their level of suspicion might be a little bit higher. It was a painful day. So if they don't learn from the mistake, guess what they're going to do? They're going to repeat it. And if you're like me and you teach, then you won't even know to teach the people that follow you to do better. So we don't improve, the mistakes get repeated. So how do we fix the specific problem? Now that I've depressed all of you, what's the solution? I have a solution, all right? As an administrator, I know that you don't mention a problem if you don't have a solution. So we got to increase suspicion. How do we do that? We need to get feedback. We know these confirmed cases because when they're confirmed, there's a paper trail that goes with those cases. So look backwards in those same cases, find the people who saw them before and let them know that the abuse was missed. Tell them about it. Presenting parent, oh, and by the way, for HIPAA and things like that, doesn't apply. This is a person who actually had clinical work with that patient, so they're part of that feedback loop. They can be included by HIPAA. Presenting parent may not have suspicion either. Create a shared database that we can use to query, that all people can query. So I realize this gets into privacy issues, but this is something we have to decide which is more important. Is privacy more important than identification? And let me get just an example of how this can work. Anybody here heard of the CURE system? Physicians have heard of the CURE system. So if any of you have filled a prescription for a controlled substance anywhere in the state of California from any healthcare provider, I can log into the database and I can see it. So that if you were dispensed Norco 30 tablets at another ER a week ago, I can see that before I write you another prescription. It was deemed to be in the interest of public health to give me access to that record. Well, what about this one? So the process being very difficult, the threshold to report is too high. So what do? Use technology. So guess we're rolling through a system right now, an electronic patient care record system called EPCR. Across all fire stations over the last 3 months will be done on August 8th, where we'll be completely electronic. So one county organization to another county organization, create a bridge so I can hit a button and automatically forward my patient care record to social services with a note saying why I'm concerned and a contact number so they can call me back. So make it really simple. Almost done, last slide. Same thing with the ER charts. And then we've got to work on making sure that everyone has access to the key medical records.
Thank you very much. That was good.